Shocking truths about God and the Buddha. Are they all fake? New, earth-shattering discovery about the true face of Jesus Christ. This is about the shroud, the sacred, mysterious relic believed to have wrapped Jesus Christ's body after his passion. Measuring nearly 4 meters long, the cloth bears a faint image of a man with wounds matching the biblical accounts of Christ's suffering. What's extraordinary is that this image is neither painted nor drawn. Rather, it results from some subtle transformation of the fibers, an imprint that modern science still cannot fully explain. For centuries, this shroud has drawn countless pilgrims, scientists, and theologians, all captivated by a major question. Is this truly an authentic testimony to the life, death, and resurrection of the Savior, or simply a timeless artistic masterpiece? Every analysis has yielded new findings, yet raised even more questions. The enigma behind the shroud is not only a reminder of faith, but also a journey of discovering the supernatural, beyond human comprehension. Does the truth lie within the cloth or within the human heart? Recently, in August 2024, Italian scientists claimed to have found definitive evidence. What exactly is the truth behind the Shroud of Turin? Let's explore it in today's video. The shroud's journey through history. In 1353, a famous knight named Geoffrey, spelled G-free in the original Vietnamese text, constructed a small chapel in the village of Liry in northern France. He intended to display several precious relics in this chapel, not only to share them with the faithful, but also to generate income for the parish, because at that time, visiting churches and making offerings was a common custom. 2 years later, when the chapel was completed, a special relic on display caught everyone's attention. A linen shroud measuring 4.4 meters in length and 1.1 meters in width. Faintly visible on the cloth was the outline of a man's body bearing marks of torment, particularly on his hands and feet where bloodstains appeared. The curator of the exhibition confidently declared that this was the shroud donated by Sir Geoffrey, an extremely precious relic, for it was the very cloth that had wrapped the body of Jesus Christ after his passion. People quickly called it the Shroud of Jesus. News of this relic caused a great stir. Christians from everywhere flocked to see it with their own eyes. The tiny chapel in Liry became a pilgrimage site, generating significant income for the parish. But where did this shroud come from, and how did Geoffrey acquire such an important relic? This question would puzzle historians and scientists for centuries to come. Why did Jesus' shroud disappear for over 1,000 years and then suddenly resurface? Historians have tirelessly sought an answer, trying to piece together the journey of the Turin shroud. First, they needed to verify a basic fact. According to the customs of that era, was Jesus indeed wrapped in linen after his crucifixion? The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all describe a similar account. In summary, after Jesus was crucified and died on the cross, a follower named Joseph and a sympathetic Jew named Nicodemus asked permission to take his body down from the cross. They wrapped Jesus' body in a linen cloth before sundown and placed him in the tomb Joseph had prepared, located near the crucifixion site in a garden within Jewish territory. They then sealed the tomb with a large stone. According to the Bible, Jesus being wrapped in a linen cloth is entirely factual. But what happened to the cloth for over 1,000 years? And how did it end up in the possession of Geoffrey in France? At the time, no one questioned these details. People simply believed what they were told. Unfortunately, Geoffrey was never able to explain the mystery, because shortly after completing the chapel, he died in battle during the Anglo-French Wars, leaving the origin of the shroud an unanswered enigma. About 100 years later, in 1453, the shroud appeared in Chambéry, the capital of the House of Savoy, a powerful dynasty originating from eastern France. Over 20 years later, this dynasty moved the relic to its new capital, the city of Turin in Italy. From that point on, the shroud was kept in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, where a dedicated chapel was built to protect it. Hence the name Shroud of Turin came about, leading many to believe that the image on the cloth was the true visage of Jesus Christ, left there by some miraculous power. Considered a divine miracle, the shroud was viewed as the only, most genuine evidence of Christ's appearance. Yet one major puzzle troubled researchers and the public. If this truly was Jesus' burial cloth, how did Geoffrey come to possess such a crucial relic? Historians have tried to reconstruct part of the shroud's journey from the time of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Several centuries later, the shroud was taken to Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Possibly it was brought there under Emperor Constantine the Great, who elevated the church to a state religion, actively collecting sacred relics. Perhaps he found the cloth among the populace and brought it to his court for safekeeping, granting believers access to venerate it. Many centuries passed until 1204, when Pope Innocent III launched the Fourth Crusade. Instead of heading for Jerusalem, the Crusaders became entangled in a succession dispute in the Byzantine Empire. Rather than liberating the Holy Land, they turned and attacked Constantinople. After capturing the city, the Crusaders plundered and destroyed it, seizing countless relics from churches and palaces. One of these was believed to be the shroud, which fell into the Crusaders' hands. Many relics were later sold in European markets or ended up in private collections. The shroud next appeared in 1344, over a century after the sacking of Constantinople. At that time, the French knight Geoffrey took part in a crusade in Anatolia, now in Turkey, returning home victorious. It's believed that Geoffrey may have acquired the shroud during this military campaign. Some historians speculate that the shroud was sold or gifted to him at that time, and he subsequently brought it back to France. The tale of the Turin shroud's journey from the era of Jesus to the possession of Sir Geoffrey remains shrouded in unresolved mysteries. But clearly, it went through monumental events and brutal wars to become one of the world's most famous relics. Geoffrey obtained the shroud during the Crusades. Then, about a century later, the House of Savoy purchased it from Geoffrey's granddaughter and placed it in a church in Chambéry. Around another 100 years later, the shroud was relocated to the Cathedral of St. John in Turin. During this period, a serious incident occurred. In 1532, a massive fire broke out at the Sainte-Chapelle in Chambéry. The flames caused the silver protective covering of the shroud to melt, and the molten silver dripped onto the cloth, burning part of it. The chapel's staff managed to extinguish the fire and save the shroud. However, burn marks and water stains remain to this day, becoming part of its historical record. Since its emergence, controversy has always surrounded the Turin shroud. Christians firmly believe it is the authentic relic and that the image on the cloth is the true portrait of Jesus. Skeptics, however, argue it's a hoax. In 1390, after 35 years on display in Liry, Bishop Pierre d'Arcis wrote a letter to the Pope declaring that the shroud was a forgery. He claimed to have found the artist who created it. Shocked by this revelation, the Pope ultimately allowed the shroud to remain on display under the condition that it be explicitly presented as an artistic creation, not a genuine relic. However, subsequent popes rescinded this statement and reinstated the belief that the Turin shroud was authentic. In 1946, when the ruling House of Savoy ended its reign in Italy, the last king donated the shroud to the Vatican. In 1983, it became the personal property of the Pope. Starting in 1978, scientists began extensive research on the Turin shroud under a project called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP. A team of 33 scientists supported by the Vatican investigated it thoroughly. Initial results indicated that the image on the cloth was indeed created by a body that had been crucified. The small traces of blood were confirmed to be human blood, and no medieval painting materials were found on the cloth. This finding directly refuted Bishop d'Arcis's 1390 claim that the shroud was a forgery, or theories that it was simply a medieval artwork devised by an artist to gain fame. The research team asserted that, based on 14th century knowledge, there was no known technology to produce such a permanently imprinted human image on fabric. Even today, scientists have yet to explain definitively how the image formed on the Turin shroud. In 2003, Dr. Raymond Rogers, a member of the STURP team from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, proposed an intriguing hypothesis. He suggested this phenomenon could involve the Maillard reaction, a chemical reaction between sugars and amino acids that produces brown or black compounds under heat or at room temperature, e.g. when bread is toasted. Rogers argued that when Jesus was crucified, his body became severely dehydrated. After his death, the onset of decomposition released large amounts of amino acids from the body's surface. Meanwhile, linen from that period likely contained higher natural sugar levels. With the body temperature possibly reaching around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius, due to dehydration, a localized Maillard reaction between the body and the linen could have produced the brownish compounds that became embedded in the fibers, forming a faint image of a man. Although this hypothesis may seem complex, it gained some traction in the scientific community. Notably, Rogers's team attempted to replicate these results in a lab using the Maillard reaction on linen, but all they got were random shapes, not the highly detailed figure seen on the shroud. Meanwhile, the shroud's image eyes, nose, mouth, neck are depicted with striking clarity, almost as if by a master artist's hand. This left Rogers disappointed, as no archaeological evidence from contemporaneous tombs had revealed similar images on burial linens. He could not gather additional proof to bolster his hypothesis. In 2015, another study led by Giovanni, a scientist at the University of Modena in Italy, proposed that under 1st century Jewish burial customs, the deceased were interred within 24 hours, especially in the hot climate of the ancient Middle East. To mask odors and help preserve the body, they would apply beeswax, aromatic oils, and other fragrances before wrapping the body in cloth. Giovanni posited that these substances might have interacted with the linen to create the image. He focused particularly on how the back side of the cloth bore a clearer image than the front, possibly because the body lay against the cloth, causing the oils and wax to concentrate on the back due to gravity. Although Giovanni's hypothesis initially seemed plausible, the STURP team back in 1978 had used various imaging techniques and collected samples from the shroud for chemical analysis. They found no traces of aromatic oils or beeswax, which Giovanni's theory required. He explained that the high temperatures during the 1532 fire might have evaporated these substances, but there was no evidence to support that claim. Thus, his hypothesis remained unsubstantiated. Additionally, 20th century archaeological excavations in the Middle East uncovered many 1st century tombs, yet none of the discovered burial cloths bore images of people akin to the Shroud of Turin. This further suggests that simple application of oils and wax would not produce such an image. Nothing supports Giovanni's notion, rendering it untenable. In 2023, a photographer named STURP, the text seems to abbreviate ST for a member of STURP, but we'll keep it as it is, recalled a remarkable finding from 1898. An amateur Italian photographer named Secondo Pia took the first ever photographs of the Turin shroud. Astonishingly, when he developed the negative, the image was far clearer than what can be seen with the naked eye. This indicated that the shroud image is more suitably analyzed under photographic techniques. The photographer remarked that in his entire career, he had never seen anything like it. If photography only emerged around 1826, could a medieval technique have prefigured it in the 14th century? In 1993, a researcher named Nicholas Allen proposed that medieval artists might have used silver nitrate to coat linen, then placed the cloth in a darkened room where light from a small pinhole would project onto it, essentially turning the cloth into a giant negative. This could explain why the shroud image resembles a photographic negative. While intriguing, the STURP team's 1978 analyses found no evidence of silver nitrate on the cloth, so this hypothesis didn't stand. In 2011, Italian physicist Paolo Di Lazzaro published findings on how such an image might form. He used high-powered ultraviolet laser pulses to irradiate linen. Short bursts of radiation, just 40 nanoseconds each, produced discolored marks similar in color and shading to those on the shroud. However, Paolo admitted that to create the entire human image on the Turin shroud would require 14,000 laser devices operating simultaneously, far beyond present-day capabilities. In reality, laser technology dates only to around 1960, so there's no way 14th century or 1st century folks had 14,000 high-powered lasers to craft the shroud. His hypothesis, therefore, is clearly an anachronism. Meanwhile, some scientists have tried to explain the image formation by analyzing carbon-14 dating of the cloth. In 1988, a British research team, with papal approval, took a small sample of the shroud for radiocarbon testing. They concluded the cloth originated in the 13th or 14th century, perfectly aligning with Bishop Darcis's 1390 claim that it was a forgery. Many believed the shroud was indeed a medieval artwork. However, 4 other teams also performed radiocarbon tests on samples from the shroud, yielding dates spanning roughly 300 BC to 400 AD. Which results were correct? Most scientists remain skeptical of the radiocarbon tests for a simple reason. Over the centuries, the shroud has endured many events, transfers between owners, fire damage, and numerous repairs and restorations. All these factors contaminate the fabric. The samples could contain material from various eras. Furthermore, in order to avoid further damage, only tiny samples could be taken, making it impossible to ensure these bits truly represented the shroud's original threads. Consequently, carbon-14 dating did not provide a definitive answer. Several members of STURP instead examined the physical characteristics of linen samples from different eras. Comparing medieval samples, and even some dating back 5,000 years, they discovered that first-century linen fragments found at an archaeological site in Israel possessed very similar physical traits to the Turin shroud. This indirectly suggests that the shroud may not be a medieval product, but could indeed date to Jesus' time. Hence, on August 20th, 2024, Italian researchers used a novel technique that determined the cloth was woven about 2,000 years ago, i.e., in the era of Jesus. Specifically, a team from the Institute of Crystallography of the Italian National Research Council recently analyzed the linen using wide-angle X-ray scattering, WAX. This method measures the natural aging of linen fibers, translating it into a production date. They studied 8 tiny samples from the shroud, exposing them to X-rays to gather highly detailed structural data on the fibers and their organic compounds. From these observations, the team concluded the Turin shroud likely had been stored in an environment at about 22.5 Celsius and 55% humidity for around 13 centuries before arriving in Europe in the 1500s. But how was the human image formed? According to the Bible, before Jesus made his final entry into Jerusalem, he appeared to the apostles on a mountain, performing a miracle in which his face and clothing radiated an intense, pure, gentle light. Later, Jesus instructed them not to speak of this miracle until after his death and resurrection. Christians believe that at the moment of his resurrection, Jesus' body once again emitted a brilliant light, comparable to 14,000 lasers, imprinting his image on the burial cloth, leaving an eternal mark. Believers see this as the real cause of the shroud's image. Is the Turin shroud a divine miracle or not? It can neither be proved nor disproved. Thus, science and faith must remain separate. Those who trust science can continue searching for answers, while believers in God can keep their faith intact. What if everything you know about Buddhism and Hinduism is based on a lie? Today we'll delve into a religious controversy so intense it could rewrite Eastern spiritual history. Imagine this. The Buddha, an enlightened sage, founder of one of the world's major religions, turns out to be a disguised Hindu deity. You may have heard that some Hindus believe the Buddha is an incarnation of Vishnu, sent to Earth as part of a divine plan. But this is where things get more complicated. Many Buddhists vehemently reject this, insisting that the claim is not a sacred revelation, but a form of spiritual appropriation. In the next 20 minutes, we'll explore a mystery dividing millions. You'll hear conflicting perspectives from both sides. We'll examine ancient scriptures that hint at hidden truths and uncover a shocking theory that may upend this entire debate. By the end of the video, you may find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about 2 of the world's major religions. Get ready for a journey to the heart of Eastern spirituality. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that our goal is to explore and inform, not to offend or show disrespect to any religious belief. This video will present various perspectives to encourage open-minded discussion and mutual understanding. A tense theological confrontation between Buddhism and Hinduism could change how we understand both religions. Imagine a Hindu text casually mentioning the Buddha as one of Vishnu's avatars, like suddenly discovering that Superman and Batman are the same person. Though seemingly benign, such a statement ignites intense conflict. For many Hindus, it's a natural acknowledgement of a great teacher. But for Buddhists, it's seen as a grave misunderstanding or even a deliberate distortion of the Buddha's identity and teachings, the very founder of a globally influential religion. This clashes at the core of both major religions' foundations. If the Buddha is indeed an incarnation of Vishnu, this might radically alter our understanding of Buddhism. If not, then it calls into question the orthodoxy of Hindu tradition. Millions of devotees are caught in this spiritual battle, offering a wide range of opinions. Now, some Hindu traditions boldly declare the Buddha as Vishnu's ninth avatar. Far from being a fringe theory, it's a widely held view among millions of Hindus worldwide, recorded in the sacred text, the Bhagavata Purana. There, it explicitly states that at the dawn of the Kali Yuga, the Lord shall appear in the form of Buddha, the son of Anjana, in the province of Gaya, with the purpose of deluding the wicked. It portrays the Buddha as a divine figure who came to guide or mislead unworthy beings, fulfilling a cosmic duty for those who do evil. Essentially, the ancient text claims the Buddha's entire mission was part of Vishnu's grand design. Not stopping there, some Hindu scholars argue the Buddha's teachings align perfectly with Vishnu's role as preserver. They highlight how the Buddha's emphasis on compassion and curtailing harmful practices is consistent with Vishnu's sacred duty to maintain balance. From this viewpoint, the Buddha didn't rebel against Hinduism, but was fulfilling his divine task as Vishnu incarnate, purifying the religion from within. Some even go as far as to propose that the Buddha did not found a new religion at all, but that he was simply a reformer of Hinduism, sent by Vishnu. Those promoting this perspective cite compelling similarities between Buddhist doctrines and certain Hindu philosophies, particularly shared concepts like karma and rebirth. Some also contend that the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path mirrors the moral teachings of Hinduism, though in a refined way. But be careful, this isn't exactly an olive branch. It can also be seen as a theological power move that effectively absorbs Buddhism back into Hinduism. Unsurprisingly, many disagree, insisting the Buddha's core messages refute such claims. Throughout his teachings, the Buddha is portrayed as saying, "I am not a god or any sort of divinity. I am merely a human being who discovered the path to enlightenment." Placing the Buddha in the pantheon of Vishnu avatars directly contradicts fundamental Buddhist principles. Buddhist scholars argue that the notion of the Buddha as Vishnu's incarnation is found only in later Hindu texts and does not appear in the earliest Buddhist scriptures. They see this as an effort to undermine Buddhism's distinct identity, reabsorbing it into Hinduism. For Buddhists, the issue is not just academic. It's seen as a form of spiritual colonialism, a tactic to co-opt their cultural and spiritual heritage. For instance, during the 2013 Global Buddhist Conference in New Delhi, debates flared when some Hindu speakers referred to the Buddha as merely a Hindu reformer. Representatives from Buddhist groups strongly objected. This showcases that the dispute over the relationship between Buddhism and Hinduism is not confined to scholarly debates, but surfaces in modern interfaith dialogues as well. Some Buddhist leaders even call the claim that the Buddha is Vishnu a form of spiritual aggression, an ongoing campaign to erode the unique Buddhist identity in its birthplace. Buddhists emphasize the human origins of Shakyamuni Buddha, a prince who wrestled with existential questions and attained enlightenment through personal effort. This human potential is central to Buddhist philosophy. Portraying the Buddha as a divine incarnation risks reducing the story's power for ordinary people. Buddhist opposition isn't just philosophical. There have been historical examples of Hindu appropriation of Buddhist sites and symbols. From Bodh Gaya to countless Buddha statues and temples, many shrines have been turned into places of Hindu worship. Buddhists continue to fight for control of their sacred heritage. For example, as mentioned, at the 2013 Global Buddhist Conference in New Delhi, tensions flared when certain Hindu presenters claimed the Buddha was merely a Hindu reformer, prompting Buddhist delegates to protest. This indicates the controversy is anything but a settled historical matter. It remains a hot topic today across laboratories, social media, and sacred sites alike. In 2013, the Mahabodhi temple complex, the holiest site in Buddhism, was struck by a series of bombings, intensifying Hindu-Buddhist tensions in India. While the motives behind the attacks were complex, the incident underscored the fragility of interfaith relations in the digital era. The battleground soon shifted to social media, where Hindu nationalists posted extensively asserting that the Buddha's roots lie in Hinduism, while Buddhist activists responded with hashtags like Buddha not Hindu to assert the Buddha's independent identity. In 2015, a well-known Hindu leader ignited a Twitter storm by claiming the Buddha was a reformer of Hinduism, which was met with a viral #Buddha not Hindu campaign featuring historical citations used to counter this notion. Simultaneously, legal battles raged over the ownership of ancient Buddhist archaeological sites. This was not just about real estate. It was a fight over historical legitimacy and the right to preserve spiritual heritage. Political leaders have sometimes exacerbated these tensions. In 2015, India's Prime Minister made headlines when he gifted a Buddha statue to a Hindu temple in Mongolia. Critics questioned whether it was a gesture of interfaith solidarity or a veiled statement implying the Buddha was part of Vishnu's pantheon. The debate raged for weeks, overlapping into education policy, as arguments erupted over how textbooks should portray the Buddha, with each side accusing the other of rewriting history. Even international relations are touched by this dispute. China, for example, asserts that the Buddha was born in Nepal, a statement that goes beyond mere geography to separate the Buddha from Indian and by extension Hindu roots. Even the Dalai Lama, often seen as a unifying figure, hasn't been immune. He once remarked, "The Buddha was born in India and is part of Indian culture." Different parties have interpreted his words to support their own narratives, using them as ammunition in the debate over religious identity. Another startling possibility arises. What if the entire debate is built on a giant misunderstanding? What if instead of the Buddha being an avatar of Vishnu, Vishnu's later depictions were influenced by Buddhism? Some scholars note that references to the Buddha as an incarnation of Vishnu only appear centuries after his death, during a period when Buddhism was already highly influential across India. Wendy Doniger, a prominent scholar of religion, points out that Hinduism has no single founder or single scripture and no uniform theology. Rather, it's a confluence of myriad beliefs and practices that may have absorbed neighboring traditions, including Buddhism. The famous Hindu principle of ahimsa, nonviolence, might have been inspired or reinforced by Buddhist teachings. The notion of a compassionate deity taking human form to teach a path of righteousness closely resembles the bodhisattva concept in Buddhism. Some researchers argue that the worship of Vishnu gained popularity during the same era that Buddhism reached its peak in India, suggesting Buddhism might have shaped how Vishnu is venerated. If so, rather than Buddhism being a derivative of Hinduism, it could be that Hinduism was partially transformed by Buddhist thought. Vishnu reimagined as a non-violent, compassionate teacher might have been more influenced by the Buddha than previously recognized. Early texts about Vishnu typically portray him as a lesser solar deity. Over time, especially by the composition of the Bhagavad Gita, he had ascended to supreme deity status, taking incarnations to teach the Dharma similar to a bodhisattva. This viewpoint contradicts the claim that the Buddha is just another avatar of Vishnu, suggesting that much of Vishnu's later characterization was shaped by Buddhism. Should this be proven true, it would be a monumental irony. The attempt to absorb Buddhism might itself be evidence of Buddhism's profound impact on Hinduism. Unsurprisingly, this theory is highly controversial. Hindu scholars often argue it undervalues Hinduism's antiquity and continuity, while some Buddhists fear it could dilute the Buddha's unique identity. Still, if true, it redefines the entire historical interplay between Buddhism and Hinduism, showing how each shaped the other over centuries. Ultimately, the question isn't so much which side has more evidence, as it is, how do we interpret the evidence we have? With every new archaeological discovery and re-examination of ancient texts, the debate evolves. It's not just an issue of the past, but a live controversy spanning science labs, social media, and sacred pilgrimage sites in the present day. What do you think about the controversy between Buddhism and Hinduism? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to join us for more fascinating videos. For now, goodbye and see you next time.